It's time to step out now into cosmos, into mythos, into psyche.
Why, hello there. Welcome to another podcast. This one, Mark Jones returns to talk about the planetary nodes once again. And I hope that this finds you amongst many blessings that you've discovered in your lockdown, and that maybe you're even witnessing the little rattle of the tail of your kundalini that has woken up. You're not panicking that the aliens are coming now. You're not injecting some disinfectant into your veins to become immune to their probing, and that instead you've been tending to the garden in your mind, wrapping up with that cancer dragon at home. A lot of work, of course, has been going on at home in regards to our family, and I think the maybe metaphysical take on this as it is the invisible landscape, the place we go inside. And there's a lot that Rahu is pointing at just before it moves into Gemini. And so Mark and I talk about big cycles in this show. That's what the planetary nodes are all about. We don't cover the basics of them. We did that in the first podcast we did on this, and so you can scroll through the podcast app or search Mark Jones on my site and you can find all the times that he's been on the show. But this is the second show we've done on the planetary nodes, and it's just, I think, one of the more foundational ways of understanding this moment in time. And so I think if you enjoy Mark and I in our conversations, you're going to like it regardless, but especially because of the information that comes through, you're probably going to learn a lot as well. And so if at any moment, whether it's listening to Richard Houghton in the background, an amazing guitarist, by the way, check out his music, but if there's any other moment when you're like, wow, I'm really happy I'm listening to this podcast, I'm actually learning something, I'm enjoying my lockdown experience of it, consider going over to patreon.com/AdamSummer, and you can support the podcast there, but also you can support your own learning of astrology at many, many different levels, from $1 all the way up to $100. There is options for you there. And so it's patreon.com/AdamSummer, and I hope to see you there. And if you don't have any money and you just really want to support the podcast, you can also just do it on your podcast app. And you scroll down, you leave some stars, leave a review. And if you go as far to leaving a review and you send me a screenshot of that review, I will link you with a class of your choice from my website. And so I thank you ahead of time for that as well. And so here it is, Mark Jones and I talking about the planetary nodes. Enjoy. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Adam.
How is it over there in the UK? First question.
Surprisingly peaceful, really. It had also been glorious weather until today. So I'm tanned for one of the rare times in my life. When I saw Tony Howard of Astrology University on the weekend, and he was like, there's something different. I said, yeah, this is what I'd look like if I lived in California. It's amazing what it does to the British psyche if you have 4 weeks of sunshine, just, and you're working outside, and, it's just really nice.
And I can fully understand
yeah,
because I experienced with you all what I think everyone is saying the worst winter ever.
It was certainly the wettest. Yeah, it was mild and wet, but it was so wet, so consistently wet.
Well, there was a few storms that flooded things. I don't want to say that's mild. I saw photos of you trying to dig a ditch.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that was intense, wasn't it? Yeah. My daughter likes to watch that video. for those who haven't seen it, obviously everyone, I am just in what is normally a very pleasant little stream that runs alongside and then through my land, my house, my garden. And it is suddenly 20 times bigger, and I am live in it with a shovel trying to dig out a new trench so it doesn't flood my garden for about 45 minutes before the cold and everything caved me in. But luckily my father-in-law came around half an hour later, and I managed to get back out there and finish the job and save the day. But my goodness, I never thought I'd become this kind of person, Adam. You know, it's like shockingly intellectual. You know, it's like, well, just taking me out of the library, taking me out of the consulting room, you know, and just throwing me into earth and soil and water and manual labor, and, you know, with a purpose, not just like, you know, working out at the gym, watching your miles tick by, but, you know, for a reason. This thing about the land here, which coming to Wales, I've come back to literally where my forebears used to live. And when we had the house in principle, but we didn't yet own it, I discovered that the local artist of the area, you know, was a relative of mine. And I have his painting of the church at the top of the hill in my office and things like that. And then just, you know, this land, I know you stayed here, pal. And the last time we spoke, it was in the pleasure of personal company. It seems like a different era right now that we were sat together closely in a room after having mooched around my local district together. Yeah. It's like a different world now, isn't it, almost? And
feels that way.
And, you know, I feel for, as you well know, there were serious floods here over the winter, and some people have gone into forced lockdown in homes that aren't yet ready or recovered from the flood damage. So, you know, I feel for people who, I likened it to a student of mine as like a game of musical chairs, that game you play when you're a kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're dancing around and the music stops and you've got to find a chair, but a chair's been removed. Well, it's like the music stopped. Where were you when the music stopped? Maybe you were stranded in a different country, or maybe you're somewhere really cool, or maybe you're just staying at home. But that was the lottery, wasn't it? Some people were more okay than others when the music stopped.
I've been thinking about that a lot, Mark. And it's a good analogy for musical chairs, because wherever we fell, like that was our karma. And being where I'm at in Boulder, like there's so many things that I can be grateful for, even though it's unfortunate that I'm not in the UK and I'm not with my girlfriend. And there's a lot of things I could complain about, but being here and really knowing this land, like there's any stretch of landscape that I know better on this planet, it's here. And my favorite part of the Front Range is literally a block away from where I'm sitting. And so it's really interesting that I get to walk that land every day. And not a lot of people are out. And if they are, like when I'm walking down the street, they cross to the other side of the street. It's a very interesting phenomena.
That's quite weird, isn't it, in itself?
Yeah.
Just that happens is so strange. In those moments, it's a bit like one's worst personal paranoia is just manifest into reality. Oh, people are avoiding me. Oh yeah, of course they are. Yeah, it's not just personal. Yeah. But isn't it interesting that we've both mentioned the land? Because I do wonder, you know, there's been a loss of traffic pollution here. The air quality's been fantastic. We've had, yesterday evening, there were ducks in the garden, wild ducks. My daughter was squealing with delight and then chasing them up the hill and then shocked when they flew off. And then she was trying to jump in a little cardigan with angel's wings on the back of it. She was trying to jump and go, fly higher, so she could follow them, you know. And it's like the wildlife, you know, this sense of the air quality, the sense of the land breathing, the trees breathing, that the noise of civilization has just calmed down a substantial notch under all this, you know, lockdown.
It's observable. Absolutely. And here I've talked about it a few times, but the evidence, especially of the lions, like the mountain lions in the hills, like they're coming down and checking everything. Like, what's going on down there? And we've had a lot of snow over the last couple of weeks, and I've seen a lot of big cat prints on my walks.
That's so cool.
I love it. They're just so curious. Cats are so sensitive. And they're like, wait, what's going on down there? Oh, everyone's watching the Tiger King. Get it. Got it. We can we can just walk around. But yeah, sometimes, or you know what, I want to say this too, with your adorable little daughter chasing after ducks. That was my first word, Mark. Duck.
Really?
But it sounded like fuck, I guess. My mom told me. I'm like, fuck.
Yeah. She says quack, quack for ducks. She goes, quack, quack.
Yeah.
That's what she calls them, yeah. But her first word was yes. And it's really fantastic. One day, my daughter just said yes to us. And then we realized we could ask her things and she could say yes. It was this really liberating word. My wife could argue that she also said mummy, but I'm pretty sure it was yes first. And it felt incredibly affirmative, to be honest. I almost posted it on Facebook that day. My daughter said her first word and the word was yes, because it felt like a kind of benediction. And especially when you have very young children, it's like trying to keep a baby otter alive or something. You know, you're very giving, you're concerned, they're cute, they're wonderful, but you don't really know. You know, you're guessing, you're intuiting, you're just in a kind of non-verbal rapport some of the time. And it is such a relief to your conscious mind when your child can start communicating and affirming things for you. It really does just change the relationship, because there's a lot that you're winging in the early stages of being a parent. And paradoxically, you're winging it in a very high pressure situation. You know, you're a parent for the first time, oh my God, and you're exhausted relentlessly because, you know, the sleep cycle's all over the place, and etc. So it's a really incredible phase, but it's such a relief when kids start saying words and you can really feel that they can agree to things, you know?
Yes, to take her word.
Yeah.
First,
yeah.
that should be a thing. I think we should at least get at some point a tattoo of our first word. I don't know if I want to do that for Bob.
Well, yeah, or yes, exactly. It's going to be careful what it is. Yeah, duck you. But I think there is something lovely about that, and these early memories. I tell you, having a child is like a living embodiment of the natal chart in its early vibrancy, without filter, without conditioning. You know, I can tell that my daughter is, you know, a Taurus, and that she has Moon and Venus in Cancer in the 8th. You know, I can just feel that. I can feel her Moon, Venus, Cancer 8th. She can't get close enough to us sometimes. It's like she wants to be absorbed. My wife especially, but both of us sometimes. It's like she wants to merge into, to feel safe, to feel right. And it's been fascinating as an astrologer. I mean, there were these sort of intellectual propositions. I remember Samuel Reynolds at UAC saying to me, oh my God, you have this incredible opportunity. You can study, you know, secondary progressions or whatever. You can study the first X number of weeks of her life and contrast it with how her life would be lived. I mean, that assumes I'm going to live a hell of a lot longer than I probably will to really test that. But also it felt a touch intellectual, though I kind of noted it. You know, I was asked to do so. I'd look at it like a scientific investigator. You know, can you see evidence of the way secondary progressions will play out in later years in the first few days or weeks of life? And, you know, I remain a bit question mark about that. But what I can say is you can totally see and feel unfiltered natal placements. They just shine out. You know, kids are so different even before they're speaking. Their vibe is different. How they feel when you hold them. Their degree of solidity. You know, even when my daughter was only 8 pounds, you know, the first day she was born, she felt like a little asteroid of this super dense material on my shoulder, you know, like a Taurus, like a late Taurus. She felt solid, you know, really like this little rock. And lots of kids just feel really light, like flimsy, spindly. They're different, they're airy, they're watery. She felt solid, and that quality remains in her. She's not big, but she's super strong, she's super tall, slim, muscly. But she feels solid when you pick her up, and it's a quality. You realize that the elemental qualities are real, and you experience them in this unfiltered way. Whereas I've always found that kind of astrology where people are like adding up the elements you've got in your chart as if you're going to make some kind of soup out of yourself. You've got this much in water, this much in earth. I've always found that a bit of a meandering game, really, other than noting that maybe someone's got no earth whatsoever. Because that is
helpful.
Yeah. Well, my wife has got no earth, and my daughter is like this little condensed earth. It's so funny.
Straight from the Tauride meteor stream, that one.
Yes. And the contrast between them. So I really have to say that being a parent has made me understand things about astrology and psychology in this first-hand way that surprised me, actually, genuinely surprised me.
And you kind of hinted at it with your wife, but for yourself too. The synastry, I bet, is incredibly educational, seeing how she fits into your chart, right?
Exactly. And realizing what certain things mean. It's like an astrologer and how important family dynamics would be. I mean, I remember Erin Sullivan did that work decades ago about family systems. I really think it's an area of astrology you could expand on. My daughter's Neptune is on her IC in Pisces, 16, right on her IC. That is my wife's Venus in Pisces. If you know that, then you know something extra about my daughter's Neptune. You realize my daughter's Neptune IC is also literally my wife's Venus in the 4th house, part of the grand water trine. And you realize that there's something about their love sometimes where it is my daughter's happy place in the truest sense of the word. It's her spiritual home to be holding my wife in a certain type of Pisces energy field, in their love empathy. It's quite humbling to watch. It's profoundly beautiful. And then occasionally as the father, you feel a little bit like the second-class citizen who's asking permission to sit at the table and soak it up. But it is amazing. Yeah.
What do you have at 16, Mark?
Well, I don't really, I don't. No, it's not my part. My relationship with my daughter is very different. Her Pluto is my moon Venus by a few degrees. It's like something about my core energy is this very deep point of identification for her. But it's very different. And even the composite charts, my wife's a 1st house Pluto with our daughter, and I'm a 12th house Pluto. Like, actually, the core soulful dynamic of our relationship is completely different in both cases. And it's very rich. You can really contemplate that on a subtle level. I don't understand it all. I don't claim to understand it all because my daughter's too young, but I have very rich intuitions. Like, I have been through something with my daughter of a particular 12th house way. It's almost like I can feel sometimes how, I don't know, I walked out of a burning building holding her, or I came through something.
A meteor impact.
A terrible personal cost, to hold this little thing. And it is interesting. I caught her as she was born. I caught her. I only had time to put one glove on. It was all happening so quickly.
Wow.
This little thing, she went onto my shoulder. My wife got up after 22 hours of labor and promptly fainted. And there was this crash team, because when you faint in that environment, there's suddenly like 11 or 12 emergency medics in the room. So my daughter's sleeping soundly on my shoulder, this little meteor condensed rock of energy, like almost pressing my chest to the back of the chair as if I'm being pushed to the ground by this huge weight of this tiny thing. And there's this emergency medical team just going through the room, this crazy stuff like you're in an episode of ER. And the whole time my daughter's just sleeping peacefully, just held there. And that intuitively right now, this is the first time I've put these two things together, feels like the intuition I have about our 12th house Pluto, that I've been in some situation holding her through this, thing unraveling around us to come to a certain place. Whereas my wife's relationship with her is very active, very interactive. My wife leads her into the world. I have this sense of just the holding, or this background presence of how she's safe. Yeah.
Mark, are you familiar with Groff's perinatal matrices?
Yes.
When you told that story, that was the first image that came to mind, like stage 3 and 4, like the Pluto phase. And that's the trauma of birth.
Yes.
and then Uranus, the final liberation of it. But she has Uranus in Taurus, right?
Yeah,
In
she
her
does.
chart?
0 degrees. Yeah.
0
She's
degrees.
right. She's right at the beginning of it. Yeah.
Mm.
It's 0 degrees, like 0 minutes or 10 minutes or something. It's right early on.
And the way you describe this dynamic with Pluto 12th house, I mean, you do have a business that's called the Pluto School after all.
Yeah. Well, and even what relationship, my moon, Venus, her Pluto, what my work in the world, what will that mean to her growing up? Or these are unknowns, aren't they? And me being so much older, when she's later in life and I'm not even around, or I'm an old infirm man of some kind, reading books in his study, she will be able to watch videos of me teaching and doing various things slightly more in my prime, as it were. Just who knows what these resonances are through time. What I will say is this: when you're connected soulfully to a young being like that, and you're an older person, an older father, you reflect on these things. Time resonates through different dimensions. I already plan to some extent how there will be good things for her even after I'm gone. There's that kind of, you go into this like love responsibility dynamic where you're just thinking in this whole other way about how you take care of things. It's quite incredible. But yeah, I think Groff's work is really incredibly interesting, and I don't think enough's been made of it, both in transpersonal psychology. I think the unfortunate thing of the psychedelic aspect and then the holotropic breath work to replace it once psychedelics are, essentially made it so illegal that you can't use them, has pushed it to a sideline that it doesn't deserve. It's so ultra profound, and it has, huge implications astrologically too. It hasn't been integrated, frankly, in our astrological understanding. And I do know, it stands later in life now, that there is some attempt to create a legacy right now, like a Groff Foundation, and there's going to be some literature or some courses, because I think that work is massively deserving of that understanding. It's so appropriate you bring it up. I think it could revolutionize our understanding of the outer planets. And by the way, if this situation teaches us anything, it's that the outer planets have an impact on the actual world, the day-to-day world. It's caused me a slightly painful humor to see certain traditional astrologers analyze this whole situation with, Mars, Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. But it's like, Pluto came together with Saturn and the world stopped. And there's still a bunch of astrologers ignoring Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune.
I do scratch my head at that. I mean,
it's kind of mind-blowing, Matt. It's mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing from really all three perspectives. And you could even throw Chiron in there too, but we'll leave him out for now. Sorry, guy. But with and we can speak to this because you and I have both been talking about it from our own angles, you with this emphasis on the planetary nodes as well. I don't really teach about that, but I'm very familiar with it. And I mean, starting with all the planets in Capricorn that I've been calling the boneyard for the past year and a half, it was hard to know what exactly would happen. And I've even done a whole podcast called The Black Swan, like, and speaking that, like, that's
Yes.
how it's going to occur. Like, it's going to be like the UFOs footage being released today. It's like, what's that about? But from the Uranus perspective, it's ever so interesting that, yes, Uranus is in Taurus now, and we have these little meteor babies coming in to ground us, but also what comes next with Gemini. And that's something I want to speak to because, like, Uranus's history in Gemini, which is our future, especially the US, is a little alarming. And then the Neptune and Pisces piece, which from my angle, like, so much of this, Mark, really did begin on the collective level when that Mercury was retrograde in Pisces close to Neptune. And then the main quality that still remains within all of this is this immense confusion around what the hell's going on. Like, everyone's on a different wavelength. I don't know about you, but here in the US, all my friends, everyone I talk to is on a different frequency with what is going on.
Well, I think the US is the most polarized like that.
Yeah.
It's like this happened in China, and it's like the hidden advantage of a totalitarian state, if we can put it like that. And there aren't many, so you should celebrate the few that there are. The hidden advantage of a totalitarian state is that, when this shit hits the fan, you can lock down 400 million people in a day. But it's like the US character just presupposes that would be a very challenging thing. Hey man, don't impose on my freedom of movement, my freedom to do as I please. And so the free state of America stands, I think, as kind of character contrast to the needs of the time. And then we have this very nuanced situation. I hold a middle ground. I think, it's clearly not a hoax. There is this virus. It does, in a certain percentage of people, produce COVID-19. That is deeply problematic for X percentage of those people. It's not just the elderly and those with underlying health problems, but it is primarily. But it hits enough of them to be really serious, but it doesn't hit enough of them to be like the bubonic plague or something like some people are projecting, like the worst thing that ever ripped through humanity. Clearly the numbers show it's not as bad as a lot of people thought it would be. Having said that, so, it's real, but it's not as bad as it could be. So then you could ask, why is the whole world shut down for this thing that's real, but not as bad as it should be or could be? And then we've got to ask, in the long run, all the people who become bankrupt, who can't afford their health insurance, the stress factors, the mental health, the lack of other treatments like valuable cancer treatments they can't get because hospitals are cordoned off because of COVID. What are the hidden costs of lockdown for people, in the long run? It's very tricky. It's a very nuanced situation, really.
And to you, because I know it's not one thing probably in your mind, but to you, what is the main dynamic that is creating this chapter in human history? Is it something to do with the planetary nodes? Is it the Pluto-Saturn cycle?
Well,
what do you think?
Okay. Well, so let's look at it astrologically and see if it can point towards a greater human truth. That being the great challenge of astrology, that frankly, maybe not enough astrologers always pick up. It's one thing to read the Pluto-Saturn cycle. My researcher earlier today sent me an Excel spreadsheet with the entire Saturn-Pluto cycle for the last few thousand years with different kind of formulations of it.
That's
great. Yeah, my research is very good. And I'll send it you. He's great. Patrick Graham, what a star. At the same time, analyzing that is one thing. Having something real to say because of it is another thing. Not that Patrick doesn't, and I'm not implying that, but it's a challenge to translate these things. Clearly, the Pluto-Saturn cycle is just the background of this. It's like they came together. There was a slight pause. It seemed like nothing had happened, but actually that's because it had already happened in China and there was a cover-up going on. And, I'm not going to indulge wild conspiracy theories, but it's completely obvious to any discerning person that the Chinese lied about the situation to begin with and the numbers of people involved. And that did not help the world, did it, really? Whatever face saving was going on there gave a distorted sense of what was coming our way. And then, so you had this invisible thing coming. So the Pluto-Saturn square, conjunction, the Pluto-Saturn relationship through history, it's clearly involved. You can trace it at the beginning in the 1518s, the Pluto-Saturn conjunction, to the origins of slavery, a writ from the Pope to the Portuguese to allow human trafficking effectively in Africa. You can trace these kind of phenomena, various plagues and flu epidemics that people have traced to Saturn Pluto.
Yeah, the conquest in the Americas was around that point. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that in and of itself, you could argue. But the super interesting thing is that Pluto and Saturn were coming together on their own planetary nodes. I'd identified this 8-10 years ago that this was going to happen, and I've been giving talks on it since 2017. And at my UAC talk on the planetary nodes in Chicago in 2018, I presented a slide on the American War of Independence, the Taiping Revolution, the US Civil War, the First World War, and the Second World War. And we looked at, my researcher and I, so this is from 1775 to the current, till the end of the Second World War. The war starting with a Pluto transit to the south node of Saturn or the north node of Saturn. American War of Independence, it was the south node of Saturn. So this is approximately 21, 22 Capricorn. Taiping Revolution, it was Pluto square the nodes of Saturn. In the US Civil War, it was Pluto square the nodes of Neptune, actually, in that war. But the role of planetary nodes in war, something, an outer planet conjuncting the node of Saturn, usually. In the case of the First World War, it's Saturn. In the case of the Second World War, it's Saturn. Second World War, it's Pluto to the node of Saturn. First World War, it's Neptune to the node of Saturn. And then them ending when something goes on to the north node of Neptune. Something goes on to the nodes of Neptune that follow the nodes of Saturn. So the nodes of Saturn are about 22 Capricorn, Cancer, roughly, and say the nodes of Neptune are roughly 8 Leo, Aquarius. And in that longer cycle, these longer wars had a hit in the early 20s of Capricorn, and then you get the Japanese surrender when Pluto gets to the north node of Neptune, or you get the Treaty of Versailles when Neptune gets to the north node of Neptune. So we have this phenomena, as well. So you have this simple pattern basically where outer planet transits to the node of Saturn in particular, south node of Saturn, roughly 21, 22 Capricorn. And then you get the end of these larger conflicts coming when something, sometimes that same planet, goes on to the nodes of Neptune at roughly 8 Aquarius or 8 Leo.
So interesting.
So you had this link up to massive world conflicts, things that displaced millions of people or had high casualty rates. And there was this kind of gasp in the room at that point. I was, I don't, were you Adam? I mean, it was just bizarre because it's in this crazy, I don't know what it was, Hilton in the Miracle Mile of Chicago, which I'd never been to before. It's this incredibly tall hotel by British standards, total skyscraper hotel. Like I used to get funny feelings in my legs when I looked out on my own window. And they make this mistake about the way they arrange the rooms. So you have people getting very freaked out. People are camping out. I'm wondering why. I've gone to my room early to set up, and I think someone else is still in there speaking. And I discover, no, it's people waiting for me half an hour before the talk starts, because people have begun to cotton on that the rooms aren't big enough. And even though they've opened up a double room, I give this talk. There's 25 people sat cross-legged. There's some people that can't see the PowerPoint. They have to just turn around and look at my individual laptop because they're so close to my legs. So my usual thing of pacing around on the stage can't happen at all. I'm there in this real intense, like bear pit, and everyone gasps at this, like, "Oh my God, Mark, are we heading for a war in early 2020?" And I'm like, "Hey, I don't want to say that. I'm this guy that spends most of his time trying to cut through the superstition and astrology and say, let's not freak out about the future. Let's not use astrology to indulge our cosmic paranoia. At the same time, the evidence is pretty compelling." And then everything goes quiet. Apparently nothing happens. Saturn and Pluto come together on the nodes of Saturn and pretty darn close to the nodes of Pluto. And yet, so you ask, in a way, why is this happening? Why has a disease that's serious, but not as serious as many things that have, that's going to be nowhere near, thank God, like the Spanish flu that followed the First World War that killed 50 million people? I mean, why has it stopped the whole world in this way? And then we come to what I've argued for a long time about the symbolism of Pluto in particular, coming to its own south node and then coming together with Saturn to the south node of Saturn. Pluto was discovered on its own north node. So in the 1930s, when Clive Tombaugh discovered it, it's on its own north node, and it's taken all this time to go back around to its own south node. So Pluto's discovered, and you have National Socialism, you have the Great Depression, you have the build-up to the Second World War, the German Empire trying to rebuild after what it conceives of to be too restrictive a treaty in Versailles, etc. You have these intense rising of the forces of psychology, of the deep unconscious forces that led to the rise of the Nazis, all coming up with Pluto power. And then Pluto goes all the way back round to its south node at the same time that Saturn comes to its own south node. It's almost as if civilization's being asked to pause and take stock and say, what are the costs of the civilization project? What are we missing through our own adherence to our incredible and colossal infrastructure and hierarchies of meaning and power, Capricorn?
It's well said. And I think there is something we all are being asked to do. And it is like a contemplation around these nodes. And we can also say the nodes of the moon, who have been on the same axis, right? Capricorn,
Yes.
Cancer.
Well, exactly. They were actually aligned with it. Yeah. Really.
Yeah.
At part of the crucial build-up point. Yeah.
And one of the ways that I choose to talk about the nodes of the moon is in the form of Rahu Ketu as the dragon, right?
Yes.
And right when the phrase hit the headlines of shelter in place or stay-at-home orders, it just like flared up, like this idea around Rahu or the North Node in Cancer. And it's like all dragons live at home right now. It's like everything that we've left at home in our own hearts and our own universe that we haven't really tended to because our identities are so super fused with the world and our jobs and our identity outside of the home. Like we are all now forced to contemplate this. And I think it's a really interesting experiment, whether it's Mother Earth forcing us into it, some collaboration with the planets, whatever it is. It's this cosmic joke where we're all meant to face a dragon that lives at home. And if we don't know what it is, it's probably eating us alive, making us go stir crazy. But if we do know what it is, this is, and I don't know if you've been experiencing this, Mark, but I sure have. Most of my clients are in heaven right now. And I begrudgingly admit that I kind of am too, because it's such an intense period, but like I'm kind of liking it all in all. And I recognize my privilege. I recognize many things around it. That's why I kind of keep it to myself most of the time. But like, it's kind of a little bit of a heaven because like going deep and like doing all this wonderful Cancer work within it's hard to get there when the hustle is so fast, which is the way it was before this happened.
It's such a well-made point. I do have a series of clients. I mean, who are not just enjoying it. In a couple of cases, it's actually kind of resolved some real key tension in their life that now can't go down and gives them this respite from it. Well, I was mentioning my researcher before. He loves it, the quietness, the sense that just the noise of society and the town and the roads and the backdrop of society is just turned down. It suits introverts, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it must be maddening for extroverts, and it must be maddening for those poor people, big families in Italy that normally can go outside to a public space who've been locked down in a tiny apartment when the sun's out with lots of children. They can't even go outside. I mean, I feel for people, but I hear you. And I think your point about the nodes of the moon and this homecoming is very nicely put. I mean, this is the chart, right? This is 12th of January in London at 16:59, 12th of January 2020. This is the Pluto-Saturn conjunction went exact for the first time at 22 Capricorn. The south node of Saturn, by the way, at this exact point being 23 Capricorn, within a degree of the exact conjunction. But listen to the lineup. This is 12th of January 2020, 16:59 London. South node 8 Capricorn, Jupiter 9 Capricorn, Sun 21 Capricorn, Saturn 22 Capricorn, Pluto 22 Capricorn, Mercury 23 Capricorn. All together, and the Sun, Saturn, Pluto, and Mercury all on the south node of Pluto and the south node of Saturn, 12th of January 2020. And it's incredible. It is incredible. The nodes of the moon were involved. They were on the nodes of Jupiter. Jupiter was on its own node. It does seem that we're not going to return to normal anytime soon, just because of the actual virus. But that maybe the deeper question in there for those who are awake to it is, do we want to fully return to normal? Is there a way in which normal is redefined? The danger, the key danger being here, and some of this would be optimistic, the fact that people want to get back out to the world and rebuild their lives is a wonderful thing. But the danger here is in 2-3 years' time or whatever, we forget this and everyone's in a rush to get back to normal. But is the deeper question, what's normal to get back to?
Do you have any insight or visions of what a world that isn't the same would actually look like? Like, what do you
Well,
foresee?
there's a few simple practical levels, and some of them are just basically like memes on Facebook and stuff, aren't they? I mean, I saw one that was clearly accurate that I felt for a long time, which is clearly that job you were told you couldn't do from home or you couldn't work remotely about. You can, a lot of the time.
Sure.
When the shit hits the fan, you really can. And I think there's this outmoded supervisor mentality in the world. It was exemplified when in my house in Bristol, I had this really good plasterer come and do a damp course on a room. Did this beautiful plastering job. It was supposed to be a 2-day job. He finished by lunchtime on the second day, but I was super happy with it. And then I found it odd. I went up to him afterwards. He just sat in his van outside my house for 3 hours reading the newspaper. And I came up to him. I said, hey, just go home, chill out, enjoy yourself. It's a sunny day. He said, no, I've got a GPS tag on the van and my boss won't let me go anywhere else. I have to go back to the yard at a certain set time. And it's this mentality, isn't it? It's like a horrible schoolmaster mentality. Like, you must be seen to be doing your work, whether you are or not. You must stay in the place, whether you are or not. We can't trust you to go home where you might watch that DVD box set instead of getting on with your work. This kind of thing, it would be great to see some of that dissolve. But, bigger picture, I mean, what happens to the aviation industry for the next few years? What happens to certain aspects of the travel industry? Because you're going to have complications if, New Zealand has effectively got rid of coronavirus, but other countries haven't. How does a country travel that's resolved it to one that hasn't? Or what are the checks going to be in places in airports? What happens to certain industries as a result of this over the next few years? Does this come back next winter? Does it mutate? How long does the actual immediate crisis go on? Never mind, contemplations or changing world, and how long can certain industries survive? How long can certain restaurants or high-end hairdressers in the center of New York or Seattle? How long can the aviation industry survive, which operates on very low profit percentages? It makes a lot of money, but it has super high costs. And where does this stuff go? Is this going to change our international travel? When the nodes shift from Cancer Capricorn to Gemini Sag, how much of a struggle is that going to be? And then when the nodes go into Gemini Sagittarius and they spend a long time squaring Neptune, is that the part of us that wants to travel again fighting back, or is that the sacrifice of that part?
All the questions.
Yeah, they're big. I don't know the answers.
Questions.
Yeah, I don't know the answers, but I await with interest. I don't think the implications of this are going away anytime soon. And I guess that's what the planetary nodes revealed. Because I think there may be people out there listening, some are clearly probably very into shelter in place and, it's foolish to risk people's health. But there's probably others listening thinking this whole thing's, overreaction, etc. And
yeah, most of my friends.
Well, and I've started to reach the point where I think I'm in the middle ground, but I think if this goes on as long as it appears to be, you should at least expand the list of essential businesses. It seems ridiculous to me that you can't get a florist to deliver you flowers that's working on their own and uses a delivery service that's using safe methods. It's like, why bankrupt everyone? If this is going to go on and on and on, you'll just lose 30% of the businesses in the world. But yeah, those who worry, those who think this is all a hoax or why is this being taken so seriously, you could look at these signatures and you could say, this is the collective picture. This is partly why people feel it so intensely. And then, to counteract those who think this is all an overreaction, just listen to the reports from certain areas of northern Italy, listen to what's happening in some parts of New York, and you're just like, oh, wow. That's what happens when you let this thing go and it just rips through your community. And then it's a shit show, isn't it? It's a real hardcore mess.
Yes. So let's try to create a timeline and some optimism around it, because as two astrologers, I think we can do that safely and kind of speculate around it. And I think When hearing you talk, and the reason why, I mean, I always love talking to you, Mark, but I wanted your perspective on this because I think I successfully have seen different things posted on every single planet and or asteroid that is the cause of this. You know, if it's not that
Yes.
obscure Black Moon Lilith that I don't even use, it's some asteroid I've never even heard of that's all about this. And so the planetary nodes are really interesting because they overlap with what my main mechanism of tracking the story has been, which essentially is everything happening in Capricorn. And
Yes, I think that's right. I think your boneyard analogy is beautiful. By the way, these things, I mean, yeah, sometimes it feels like, you know, they're trying to explain the volcanic eruption that sank a whole island or destroyed a whole people by one little footprint on that island. You know, they're picking out, like you say, one little minor thing. Even the analysis of the Mars, Jupiter, Saturn by the traditional astrologers in Capricorn is insufficient without the Pluto dimension. That the Pluto-Saturn cycle has really marked this as the huge stop the world kind of quality that it's had.
I would agree. And I you know, everyone has their voice, right? And it just depends on what voice you're listening to. But I think it's very easily tracked with your amazing research on the planetary nodes, but just a very simple study of ingresses, for example, like Pluto moving into Capricorn. What was the first thing that occurred, which was a global recession because of corruption within the system. And Pluto, as you know, exposes toxicity and lies and what lives in the shadow. And so nothing was learned from that experience. Business went on, the bailouts happened, and it continued until this moment. And that was the beginning of Pluto's time in Capricorn. And now we're headed towards the end of it. And not just the end of it, but of course the support like you laid out, Saturn, Jupiter, the nodes, the planetary nodes, all of this.
I mean, it was just a crazy lineup, wasn't it?
It was unreal. And it needed a name, and that's why I call it the Boneyard. And also on that January 12th day that you laid out, I was also in Heathrow prepping to go to Peru to get to the bottom of it with 12 people. So
good for you.
We did a whole retreat.
What a time, yeah.
And we got in and got out before the military lockdown happened. It was brilliant. But my point is, like, what I really think is happening through the eyes of Pluto, and what definitely I was shown in Peru, is it's the great cleansing, really, of all of the toxicity and like the attempts to patch it up, like printing trillions of dollars, like quantitative easing or however it worked last time, is not going to work this time. I don't think so. I think that there's too much information out there and people are too aware of the corruption. I just don't think it's going to get pulled off, and it's just going to do something else. Well, my final point is that it's all moving into Aquarius, right?
Yes.
And you were mentioning something that's very interesting around these air signs, is that like there's some resolution around the nodes of Neptune, which relate to Aquarius, Leo. And then also, like, a part of this, you know, timeline that I see is Pluto, of course, moving into Aquarius and finally leaving this space. That's in 2024. And then right around that time, give it a year or two, is Uranus moving into Gemini, which is incredibly significant for the US because that's when it became a country. That was the Civil War, that was World War II, and now it's present. So there's that perspective as well. And so in my mind, I see this process from now into the mid-20s where like all of it is slowly getting exposed finally, to where it's not just fringe conspiracy theorists talking about all this stuff. The mainstream is going to start to see it, like the UFO news today. I don't know if you got that, but the Navy released this footage that's been going around forever with people that are really into UFOs. And like, why now? Like, why would they do that now? It's just a really interesting thing. And I think we're going to be able to see more and more elements of that, like watching the Red King unravel and suggest injecting Lysol into your veins to cure the virus. Just weird exposure.
That was
toxicity.
A new low, wasn't it?
It was a new low.
Already in a period where his leadership had not exactly grown in stature in the face of this crisis. It did reach a new low at that point.
Yeah.
I think your point about, well, I mean, let's back it up a little bit. I mean, you have tasted of the Peruvian love juice, and I'm sure some people will see through certain things and maybe some others won't. But it is interesting. Your point about the Pluto ingress, let's go there first. That was a brilliantly made point. And the events of 2008 and 2009 have long been analyzed. I mean, you mentioned black swans before. I mean, the work of Nicholas Nassim Taleb and the whole concept of anti-fragility, black swans. I mean, his work seems incredibly prescient. He seems like a very clear thinker. And, he's frankly astonishingly dismissive of the quantitative easing and the sort of fantasies of propping up, corrupt institutions around the 2008, 2009 crisis. And, your point about the dragon and home starting then, what made that crisis the world recession it was the concealing of these subprime mortgages into putting them together with all sorts of bonds and giving them a AAA rating and selling them out, even though some of them were, terrible risks. It was an inflated housing market, effectively, in the US that was sold up through banking practices and bought into by loads of countries around the world. So it was this inflated sense of having a home or the dream or being on the map for yourself. Is the sad thing about these institutional corruptions is they play on people's greatest aspirations for themselves, to have somewhere nice to be with their family, to have something meaningful for themselves. And I find that terribly sad, because as an Englishman with a castle, as it were, I appreciate people's need to have something to call their own or to build on, to work on. And it's a shame that these corruptions happen. Is this just the antidote, the scourge to those corruptions? I doubt it'll be as simple as that. But clearly, this is the flowering of what was an early warning shots were shown in 2008, 2009. And some people think that was calamitous enough. But I mean, this could go a series of ways, but this could be the 1930s again on some level. This could be like a world depression for years in certain areas, at least, not just a 2008, 2009.
I don't think this is a recession. I think this is the beginning of a depression, for sure.
I think it looks like that. And I think maybe it won't be across all fields, but it will certainly be major, and it will take years and years to recover.
So we haven't got to the optimistic part
all
yet.
Right.
Okay. Apologies, my fellow listeners. We will get there. I mean, I do think one way of understanding the succession of signs is what comes after Capricorn is Aquarius, and it is a way of innovating what comes before it. It's why it relates to subculture and tech and all these wonderful things. And so my feeling is kind of in the idea of black swans, but also where tech is already going. Like in this lockdown, people are going more into the machine than ever before. So that's going to be one way of understanding it. And the optimistic angle you already took of realizing that you can work from home, that your job is fully functional from your own office. There's that. And out of it sprouts like really interesting digital communities, people realizing what's most important. Of course, that's going to be food, water, and keeping it small, keeping it local, like all these types of themes that...
Well, and elevating the status of delivery drivers, people who work in supermarkets or supply chains, and giving, and then of course health workers, and giving these people their due, maybe increased respect, increased earnings,
There's a lot of ways that this can become incredibly beneficial, I think, for a lot of us, because the system that came before this, that we've been in for so long, in a lot of ways is broken. And I know you're in England, but growing up here, especially being a young person, like I can't even put into words the level of despair that I felt when I was in college or when I was a young adult, because of how much emptiness I felt within the institution, first of all, but also knowing how much I was paying down the line for it. Like I was like, once I graduate from college, then I'm like, $100,000 in debt. How the hell am I going to pay that? Because when I'm studying in college, is it going to get me a job? Like the feeling that
I do think
people
that's
have.
Terribly cruel, and that America has taken college tuition fees and amplified them to this gargantuan. You've supersized it, like America supersizes so many things. You've supersized student debt, and that's punitive. It's intensely punitive.
It feels like a prison, and it feels like a prison, like in a lot of different ways, like around, say, getting good health care. Not a lot of people can afford that. And so there's like all these essential human services just aren't available to the average person. And that kind of system is toxic. It's broken. We know about the 1% also because of 2008. Like that term came out of that time. And I don't want to get in my soapbox around it, but one of the great gifts of 2008 is Bitcoin. And you mentioned Talib, like he's very bullish on cryptocurrencies. He's from Lebanon, and Lebanon's currency is pretty much valueless right now. And so there's use cases to the blockchain technology that also shows a road out of this in a lot of interesting ways, not just financial. So like we're laying out some...
Well, and an interesting aside, on a more local, sort of classically English or British kind of level, lots of villages and towns here. In my local village, there are some good-natured folks who've been doing runs, taking food to the elderly. There's been a pop-up fish and chip shop in a car park, and they're delivering 120 meals each week free to the elderly, trapped in their homes. It's like one of those old English sitcoms or something, you know. It's like some sort of beautiful old village, England or Britain. Well, I'm in Wales, but you know, that sense of Britain at a certain era, villages, towns coming together, making sure vulnerable people have supplies. There's been an incredible sense of community here in a relatively embodied way. I mean, it's championed on a little subgroup of Facebook, the Open Chilean Facebook group, but it's like, so there's tech is used, but it's not like a tech community. It's people popping around after their shift with some groceries for someone who's self-isolating or someone who's elderly. So there is the humanity capable. The fact that there hasn't been civil unrest yet, the fact that America, the most individualistic culture on the planet, loading up on guns throughout this whole time, you know, guns seen as still essential items, loading up on guns, the fact that you're not actually killing each other yet is a testimony to the human spirit and to community, that under this degree of duress and the possible bankruptcy of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people and businesses, is a testament to the human spirit in that regard. And if this is the great war of our time, if this is the Second World War, unlike my granddad, you know, vomiting out of seasickness, I'm sure, on, you know, one of the days following D-Day and having to take a tank across Belgium. I mean, you and I talk to interesting people around the world and try and help them understand their lives.
That's exactly right.
From the comfort of our home. You know?
That was a good meme that was going around. It's like, like, stop complaining. Your grandfather was in World War II. You're being asked to sit on a couch.
Exactly. Catch up on what Netflix is offering. You know, I mean, really, we're amazingly privileged in that regard. And this virus hasn't turned out to be as serious. And if these planetary nodes hold up, when Jupiter goes to the node of Neptune in January, end of January next year, and when Saturn follows soon after in the end of February next year, will there be a vaccine? Will there be some kind of way that it's petered out? Will there be at least something that helps those people that need ventilators calm it down? Maybe. You know, it's like, I don't think, I guess I'm a pragmatist. I don't think this situation is as serious as lots of people think it is. I don't think it will just change the world forever in some complete way, because that's not how people work. I mean, even imagine friends, you know, or yourself at certain points in your life. I mean, you know, one goes and has these amazing experiences, or I've known people go to workshops or apparently kind of have these experiences like I was having, and then they forget about them, or the one person has like almost a semi-enlightenment experience or takes psychedelics, and 5-10 years later they're a junkie, or they just, you know, smoke copious amounts of weed all day and they don't do anything with their lives. And that other person that had that experience turns it into something. You know, in my early 20s I had experiences like that, and here I am years later, 20 sessions a week, you know, working with hundreds, thousands of people across the world over many, many years. It's people have to find their creative and spiritual will. And when you were talking about home and the return to home, and even the boneyard, and you're talking about the dragon of the nodes, it's like really what it made me think of is like Kundalini or something.
Sure.
In its repose at the seat of the spine, you know, it's like, most people can't handle awakening, and if Kundalini even flicks its tail like a rattler, they get very, very anxious and they're all over the shop.
I've never thought of Kundalini as a rattlesnake.
Yeah. You know, in some people it gets a little flicker. It's like they smoke some weed in their 20s, or they have a moment when they're in love, or something incredible happens, or a certain teacher speaks to them and there's this little flicker and Kundalini rattles its tail, but then they shut it all down out of panic. Or those people that have panic attacks when their heart chakra is opening, turn it into a panic attack because they don't know how to allow the invisible heart or the source of love from the soul to stream into them. They find it an alien quality. We're so disinherited from our birthright in soul. We're so unused to recognizing our inner royalty, the king or queen of our own soul or our ensouled kingdom. We're so unused to that it's very hard to have the sheer largesse, the sheer gravitas of our full humanity, to face ourselves, to face the future, to face a world where soul is the primary value. Because that's the redemption, really. When we recognize that being and the quality of being shining forth, the radiance of things, is the most important thing, not how many mortgages you sold that day or how many people you fooled into buying your product that's not actually that good. It's like, it's a change in values, but those change in values don't happen quickly because they're allied to a change in consciousness. They're allied to the existential and moral freedom of individuals and sections of the collective, awakening effectively to their true potential.
That is what we can be searching for, I do believe, during this. Is, in my language, there's a dragon at home, and try not to distract around it, right? Like maybe there is a little snake flittering its rattle, right? Like the Cooney's trying to wake up, and so what a great time to do your practices. Try to remember. Wonderful point you made about like how quickly we forget about ecstasis or like peak moments in our life.
Yes.
Like, try to remember your victory tales. I often talk about this with the nodes, like just as an exercise. Just think of all those peak moments in your life. Like, what have you learned? What trainings have you done? And put it to practice. What else are you going to do? You can't go to work. I mean, maybe you're working from home, but still, there's more space, I think, right now for us to go deep, and it's very poetic. And I think, at the end of all of this, when the Jupiter-Saturn cycle begins anew within the air signs, I do find that really fascinating as well.
Well, it is 21st of December this year.
Mm-hmm.
Together at 0 Aquarius, Jupiter and Saturn.
It's unbelievable.
It is very telling. It is very telling, and I love what you're saying. I do
Don't
think
you
this is.
That's
I
it.
think this is. I think this is a retreat, and I think, well, it is for. I mean,
not all of us, but it can.
I maintain quite a full caseload and a young family, but even I can feel behind the busyness, the extra quietness, the deepening. I myself am going into an extended phase of my own inner development, a quickening, and I think your point about celebrating victories is fantastic, and it's more than that. This may be unconventional advice. There are spiritual teachers that put it very, very differently, but I have found all my life that there is, at my level of development, a contrast between my peak moments and my moment by moment state some of the rest of the time. I did not just have peak experiences and then just stay there. That is not my karma. I did not have the grace of Ramana Maharshi, who had this catastrophic awakening in his teenage years and then was forever in that place. That's not my life. And I find self-remembering my truest moments, self-remembering my deepest moments. It's like self-remembering moments in life when your chart revealed itself to you. You have to learn to remember them the next day or the following week when you feel more depressed or down, or your head's cloudy, you don't have the same degree of insight. I train myself over time to self-remember the greatest truths that I've encountered inside myself. I train myself to self-remember the greatest breakthroughs I've had about my own chart. So I'm still living that insight even when I'm not in the insight space. And I think that's a phenomenally important way to grow, because what are the anchors for people having a deepening right now? Maybe they're homeschooling their kids at home, or they're really struggling, or they're wondering if they're going to go bankrupt, or whether the government will come out with that emergency relief money, or whether they'll be able to keep those other people working for them. And I think people aren't used to the idea of the structure. People are used to going to work and having a brief, having a remit, things that they're supposed to do. And we're not used to the inner remit anymore. We've forgotten the sort of inner rules, the fact that, you can have this structure to your inner life, that you can commit to certain forms in your day-to-day life that will heighten your experience of your own awareness, and therefore, over time, with commitment, facilitate your own awakening. And I think I put it to people, coronavirus, no coronavirus, the world carrying on before, the world in lockdown, the existential fragility of the human condition, the burning spiritual question, what to do with the suffering of life, that the Buddha raised. They're true always. It's always true. If we were all off to Vegas this weekend, and everything was as normal and all the planes were flying and all the groovy stuff was happening, or this lockdown, it's still true. Human suffering, and what is your response, and the possible redemption of the inner light from within, or the shining luminosity of your true nature. And that's the challenge. And for some reason in our times, in the kind of Kali Yuga of our era, or certainly at the very least the non-golden age of our time, it is not easy, is it? It is not easy to stay with that inner light. You have to train yourself. It's not easy to learn a language or learn how to play guitar. So, but those things exist in the world. There are training programs, or you can watch YouTube videos. It's like, how can we take seriously the invitation of our inner life and recognize that something beautiful waits for us there? Not just this horrible challenge for no great reward, but there's actually an immediate gift.
We need reminders, right? Like, how do you stay in that space? Of course, you're not going to remain at the peak like Ramana Maharishi, however you say his name. I know who you're talking about, though. Like, his soul was already tuned up to that high frequency. And so, like, we'll just say that when the energy got there, it remained because of his karma. But for most of us, when we have peak experiences, we can just blow ourselves out. And yeah, maybe we never come back because it's too much too soon. But like, we usually come back to a baseline. And it's like looking at any graph of something that's growing, that like you peak and then you come down to a baseline and you hit resistance and then you go back up again. And like, that's why we need reminders. And so maybe like re-listening to that, what Mark just said, more than once a week, or doing like in your house. Like, I am really good at sabotaging my bad habits by putting things in places that I know I'm constantly going to be staring at or being around, right? So quick example is like cupboard space. Like, I don't use it often because if there's like supplements, like super greens that I know I want to be taking every day, if they're in the cabinet, I won't. But if they're right there in front of the cutting board, I will. Or with whatever it is, like I'll just stick it right in front of my face. And it always reminds me to basically do something good for myself. Quotes, images, teachers, whatever it is, your chart, right? It's like stick the chart up right above the computer. Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
And for all those time we spend at work, briefs and PowerPoints and Excels for things you don't care about that much. And then people don't spend that much time about their personal relationships or their inner life. Or people research a holiday they're going to go on, or what kind of bathroom tiles they're going to have, or whether to get an iPhone or a Google Pixel or an Android. And yet they don't think about people they're dating, or they don't think about their inner life. And I think the point you made about resistance is so important to me. Of course, there's resistance when you're taking on something new and challenging. And in those great series of books like The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield, the historical novelist, he argues that when the thing is the most important to you, and what is really more important than your secret life or your private life or your inner development, your inner secret world, when the thing is the most important to you, the resistance is the greatest. That's when the deepest resistance comes up. And the resistance is just every part of you that doesn't believe. It's the hurt child in you that didn't receive enough love or mirroring. It's the person that was bullied or persecuted by teachers at school. It's the person that didn't feel clever enough, attractive enough, good enough for life. And then it's all the historical, biological roots of the human ego, our evolution through animal life, the savannas of the plains. We're both a predator and a prey animal. We have all sorts of fears about what's going to get us. We have all sorts of impulses to kill or mate with other things, all these desires, powerful desires to learn to deal with. The human experience is extraordinarily complex. On the one level, this passionate animal, on another level, this angelic potential to really sacrifice ourselves for some higher good. It's extraordinarily complex. It's like, let's give ourselves some space to work with that complexity instead of letting it shut us down. I urge us to become scientists of our own life, experimental scientists with the laboratory of your own consciousness. And it's not just a metaphor for those going off to the weed store. It's like, inner experimentation with states. When do I feel most loving? Can I amplify that? Can I learn to remember this loving space when I feel non-loving, when I feel fearful or shut down? That's the trick to me. It's like, can you utilize your creative and spiritual will to remind yourself of who you are day by day? Even if it's just as simple as I woke up down with low energy, but I remember that there's something noble about me, that there's something true about being human. Just that by the mid-afternoon will have lifted you to be standing up straight.
Shoulders
It's
back.
something. Yeah, exactly. It's something to just stand up straight as a human. On bad days, just to carry on breathing, stand up straight and be human is an achievement.
And we're getting to, we're opening, hopefully, those optimistic corridors for folks. I really appreciate everything you said.
Yeah, and this thing won't go on forever, but the irony is the existential crisis it brings up. For those who are sensitive, the implications of some of this, we don't want them to go away, really. Imagine, from one perspective, it's like the whole world's gone on most of the world has gone on a sort of enforced spiritual retreat, apart from the fact that many people are locked in, I guess, with their family and maybe difficult relationships. There's the sad reality of domestic abuse calls skyrocketing and things like that. But imagine, I've often tried to imagine this, the world where, say for 1 hour, like Remembrance Day or something, everyone just went quiet, but instead of for 1 minute for all the fallen, imagine if everyone just suddenly went on a week-long silent retreat, like they'd signed up for Vipassana or something. I mean, the world would be shocked. If most people just ended up in silence in some beautiful location on a meditation retreat, loads of people would be freaking out, asking for the benzodiazepine or a shot of whiskey. It's like, what is it about being human where we're so afraid to sit in the dark with ourselves? I mean, that's like a fallen state in a way, isn't it? It's like our true heritage, really, the few moments where I felt I've touched the greatest truth in life. There's this burning light shining through me. I'm lit from within. And yet it's possible to feel so shaky and vulnerable and frightened and alone in the dark as a human. And yet there's this burning, magnificent light. And that's just like the world's greatest paradox. And I wonder if it is avoidable. I'm not sure it is. Maybe that's a necessary suffering. Maybe you have to go through the one to get to the other.
The great questions of Kali Yuga, Mark.
Yes.
I mean, I think maybe we should do another one at some point talking about big cycles, because I haven't ever done a podcast on the Kali Yuga Yuga cycles of the Great Year.
Yes.
And like that too is like bringing it to the planetary node level is a big step out there. Looking at Pluto-Neptune cycles, bigger step out there, but really processional.
Well, precession, exactly.
Amazing. And like we are ascending out of the bottom, like the ultimate shit of the great cycle, which is Kali Yuga to the Indians and the Pisces age to our lingo. And that's where the Aquarius age idea comes from. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind too, is what you describe of this like blinding inner light. Like it's a reality of being human. It's the consciousness, the great mystery that's there. And that light is absolutely present when you shut your eyes and you go and explore it. It's there. Imagine in 10,000 years when we're at the peak of the great cycle, when we're back in the golden age, Satya Yuga. That's like a given. And it is like maybe it's even every month, Mark, where like there's a whole day that the whole planet just goes into silence. Can you imagine the vibe on those silent days?
I think it's important to think like that. And I think you're hinting here, the Pluto transition to Aquarius in the mid-2020s. I mean, when does the age of Aquarius start? There's this whole kind of thing. And, I'm not saying that is the start of it, but the fact that Jupiter and Saturn go in there at the end of the year, the fact that Pluto's there for a very long time in the mid-2020s, it's not irrelevant to it, is it? I think there are other complicated factors, and it would be interesting to look at the dates when Pluto is going to be on the nodes of Neptune there and some other cycles. But the fact that Pluto starts in the mid-2020s to go into Aquarius is surely relevant to this transitional phase. We are in some kind of transitional phase from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And, the optimism of the 60s under the Pluto-Uranus influence was kind of the age of Aquarius is now. Well, it's much more complex than that. Maybe it's a transition of a few hundred years. I don't know how it works exactly. But it's certainly interesting that big players are shifting into Aquarius in the next few years. And that the whole Capricornian edifice and structure of the world is on pause right now. That the world just paused itself to let a virus play out. That it even can just pause itself like that is interesting. That it does so as all these planetary energies shift towards Aquarius is super interesting. So I think, prior to even that beautiful idea of the golden age in Hindu cycles, the age of Aquarius is a real transition. The precession is heading towards that. It's not making it up. It's not excessive 60s optimism. Now, we don't know. There are a series of theories when it exactly happens, and I doubt it is just one single date. But it's certainly a movement towards it, isn't it? Pluto entering the picture and staying there for years.
There's a non-zero chance that it's not correlated. Yeah.
Exactly.
And yeah, just the big transitions, and we can get onto that subject and get lost, I'm sure. But I really like where we took the conversation towards the end there, Mark. And I'm curious, maybe like a lot of folks are, because this is the second podcast we've done on the planetary nodes. When is this book coming out that you've been working on?
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. This book was written. Really, the essence of the material was written nearly 2 years ago now. It's on its third editor. It's complex material. I'm sure this doesn't mean it will avoid all its flaws as a book, but it does mean that it'll be very clearly written, hopefully, so that the complexity shines through. It will be out this summer. It's in final editing now. And you see, when I conceived of it many years ago, Adam, I was thinking in terms of these cycles, and I was thinking of looking at precession in the different astrological ages, at least of the last maybe 8 or 10,000 years, since the kind of shift towards agriculture and the movement away from hunter-gatherer societies. But it just got philosophically very complex, and it would have been a lot of like from Mark's intuition type writing, which I'm not saying is valueless, but I realized that the planetary nodes are these, to those who know, this incredibly rich source of intel, and yet so few people are really paying them that much attention. There's so little modern literature on it outside of the work of Dane Rudhyar, Zip Dobbins, the guy that wrote Heaven from Earth, Grant Louis. There's a few that have considered it deeply, but I realized I had to address the community. I realized it had to be a sensible, researched book so that other astrologers might take on board this rich material. So I went into a deep historical analysis of the last few thousand years and have shown many, many things using the planetary nodes. And that's taken a lot of editing, so it's as clear as possible, so it stands the test of time. In that pause, I missed the chance to bring it out and point to the 2020 conjunction before it actually happened. But hey, I'm glad that my editor and me, my publisher and editor, and myself, we're looking at the legacy principle when we try and write these books. We're looking at things that hopefully stand the test of time. so that over time there's a body of work that we create that's meaningful. And so I've had to accept that pause to guarantee that standard. But yeah, July, June,
right.
July, very soon, certainly by August, September, it'll be out.
With the eclipses then. That's a
Fingers
good time.
crossed. Yeah.
Brilliant. And yeah, for everyone listening, because we didn't go into it in this conversation, but there is another show Mark and I did where you went much deeper into what they are. And I didn't want to rehash that in this one. So I'm glad we took the angle we did. So in lockdown, are you doing anything unique with your teaching or with the way that you're navigating Pluto School?
Generally, before lockdown this year, to be completely honest, I was taking my role as an astrologer and teacher of people more seriously, generating regular newsletters, generating more teaching material. And that was leading to these bigger workshops. And of course, lockdown has effectively put that on hold. And so I, returned with gusto to client and student work. And it reminded me how powerful that is and what a joy it is to be with people in their process and how effective it is. And what a sense of kind of afterglow you get when you're with people and they make transformational steps in their life. So there's been a kind of return to the core value of me, not just as a teacher or writer, but, I am a practitioner. This comes out of, week in, week out, 20 sessions with people around the world, therapeutic mentoring in their lives. And then, just this personal sense that I might be accepting something of my spiritual heritage in a different way, something about the probably mystical Christian leaning in my soul that has in my life been a practicing Buddhist or done various other practices, that it's hard to, out of respect for the lineage, really, something like Vajrayana Buddhism, which I practiced in my 30s, had this credible lineage, this sense of it being preserved through the centuries. And this recent sense of returning to a practice that isn't just a formally laid out one necessarily, but that corresponds to my deepest soul imprint, and yet taking that sense of greater commitment towards it. That's really the key on some level. That alongside being a parent and trying to allow the love of being a parent to overcome the tiresome qualities of sitting through kids' television or the angst of being a parent. There's a lot of angst in being a parent. You want so much for this little being, and they're hurt or they're in a difficult mood. And you go through a lot to be present for them. And you recognize that really the closest teachers in your lives are your friends and your loved ones, aren't they? Being with you today, pal. Just when you said that thing about the Pluto ingress, you just made something pop in my mind about the way certain things work, about how they herald themselves in their original imprint. That's because that's what astrology is in essence, isn't it? Something about the moment you were born heralds you, and it always reminds me how much I learn about what I actually think when I talk to good people.
I love how that works. That's why podcasting is so brilliant to me.
It is.
Like, it's something that I think I'll always do because it's, I don't know, it's I don't really want to call it an excuse, but it's a reason to connect with folks that you really resonate with and love and enjoy talking to. And then because we have to talk to make certain things real, ideas need to come to life when we're speaking them, that like bells go off, images appear, and we change each other. That's kind of what occurs. It's like an exchange. Instead of like real viruses, it's like viral memes or like idea transmissions that get in there, and some of them stick, some of them don't. But like we really
that's such an important metaphor, isn't it? Because the one sad thing about this, and I see it when we took our daughter out in the car to try and get her to sleep, and she was like, "Are we going to Nanny and Granddad's? Are we going to Emma's, my wife's sister? Are we going to Auntie Faye's, my wife's other sister? No, no." Oh, like the look on her face. She can't understand why she's not seeing these people that she cares about. And in this social distancing, it's the sad loss of human intimacy and community.
Yeah.
And yet the electric possibility of these conversations. I love what you say about podcasts. In some world, podcasts didn't immediately make sense to me years ago when they first started. And now they totally do. It's just like recording live fire, recording the crackle of ideas. There's no prep for it really, apart from we just care about what we do. We're interested in what we do. And I admire you for it. I think you keep yours very, very open-minded. And there isn't really an agenda around it. And I get that. And I guess that risks being loose sometimes, but it encourages, the real, raw and honest thoughtfulness.
Well, there's two main ways of podcasting, in my opinion. I'm sure there's a third or a fourth, but like the two main ways of doing it, which to me was always in the spirit in the beginning. I started this in 2009. And was there one? No, like the podcasts that I had listened to up to that point weren't this way, but like to me, it just felt natural to record a conversation and make sure it wasn't an interview. Exactly. It's like, sure, I'm asking questions, but like it's much more of a conversational format that you don't really have to prep too much for. And that image of taking a snapshot of a fire, it's exactly that. Like two people come together, there's either chemistry or there's not, and the ideas that come out of it is what makes it interesting to listen to. And just take Rogan as the shining example of that. He does it for 3 hours, zero plan, and it's the most popular podcast in the world. And then you have the other format, which is very much kind of like in the old world of interview and like very curated type podcast presenting an idea. I suppose like Radiolab and those like would fall into that category. And they're amazing podcasts, but it's a whole different spirit of what you're capturing with audio. And so for me, I just think, like that organic way of two people coming together and seeing what you can capture in the spirit of conversation is what a podcast is. I love it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you again, man. It makes me very thoughtful about things. And I think your point about Rogan's well made. And there are people now so particular, aren't there? Someone was shared recently in some social media about Joe Rogan endorsing Sanders or something that he'd done. Oh, I know it's Joe Rogan, as if like he's a problem from the real, pure left or the pure PC kind of vantage point. But I mean, I've never understood that. I'm not into mixed martial arts or various things that Rogan's into, but I even watched him talk to some guy about mixed martial arts, and I found it fascinating. The lineage of this particular tradition, the way certain teachers had taken it, the way some smaller Chinese master of something had won an ultimate fighting championship using this particular technique at this genius level of mastery. I guess I respect anyone who tries to be a master of things or understand things or respect other people who've attempted to really engage in something. And I think that's the openness around Rogan, isn't it? And it's kind of sad to me that, political or social things or discourse things or this puritanical drive we have in the unconscious of the collective right now, that we somehow find this pure figure who's completely without mistakes or without sin or without a human side, you could say more absurdly, is just a shame, really. That the richness is the curiosity and the difference. And, I don't expect my politicians to be shining saints. And I don't expect actors or comics to have never said anything stupid or tweeted something silly when they were drunk. It's like, I don't expect my astrologers to get everything right all the time, but I would like them to be a bit more humble when they get things wrong. It's like, isn't there just a greater realism somewhere that we could absorb people's humanity more, that we don't need for them to be perfect, that there'd be less newspapers selling when there's a scandalous story, but we'd have a more realistic view of people. I don't know.
In the Aquarian age, Mark. In the Aquarian age. Yes. Yes, it will come. Bringing that up as like one final thought, because I've mentioned Rogan before on the podcast, and I watch him when he has interesting guests on. And for people that really say don't like him or anything, it's really important to understand like why he's popular. And he's popular because of, I think there's three main qualities. One, he shocks the image of an alpha male because he's an alpha male, but he's also very sensitive. He cries a lot on the show. He's very open-minded. He's very intuitive. He's caring. It's like, that's a complex character. Number two, he's master of many things. He's a master comic, master MMA, master hunter, he's a master of many things. And so that inspires people when they listen to it. Like, oh, wow, I could be great. I could be, and like he does that. He's inspiring in that way. And the third thing, going back to it, is like he is so left leaning, but also to the right. He's nowhere. He's just open-minded. He like really does embrace, I think, beginner's mind in a lot of respects. And so those qualities, whether you love them or not, are like really
that's what I get from
qualities.
Yeah. It's the intellectual curiosity and the fact that, the guy is not a genius, but he's clever. He's not a specialist, but he's interested. And therefore he stays on it. He's going to get the real response from you. And he's not interested in the sort of highfalutin story, but he's not afraid of ideas either. And he's going to ask real questions. And in the best scenarios, then you get great guests. I watched the hypnotist Darren Brown on there recently. Fantastic about, the different ins and outs of hypnotism. I mean, when it's the right guest in that mix, you learn so much. And it elevates intelligent conversation too. I mean, let's not forget how radical it is, a 3-hour conversation in some LA basement on relatively intellectual subjects, some of the time, have millions of views or listens. Millions.
Oh, more than most TV stations.
It's mind-boggling. The world seems to be turning around and saying intelligent conversation, culture, learning about someone of interest, learning about their focus, learning about what they've learned is interesting to me more than the rerun of Everybody Loves Raymond or, whatever.
That's right. That's another optimistic channel. We accidentally fell into it, Mark.
Yes.
Because podcasting does do that. Conversation changes people. And that's what's so beautiful about podcasting is there's thousands of people listening to this one right now as a little fly on the wall, but like there's something that you said that maybe got into their mind and will be there for a very long time and it will change them.
Well, that's the seeds of Aquarius. And Dane Rudyard, the founder of modern spiritual astrology, the person that got into the planetary nodes, he argued that Western civilization was in an autumnal phase, that the leaves of its first outgrowth were falling to the ground. And the key was, are you going to identify with those fallen leaves, or are you going to identify with the new seeds underneath them that are going to come up in the next spring, the next era?
What a great image to end on. The autumn leaves. He's so poetic, Mr. Rudyard.
Well, and he was really tapped in. He was reading Jung as it emerged. He was hanging out with Roberto Saggioli in the 1930s before the war. It's this real meeting point of astrology and psychology. He was right at the heart of it, and the Second World War kind of pruned some of it back, but we can pick it up again. And maybe it is the seeds of that Aquarian impulse, and maybe even this podcast quality and sharing these sparkling, crackling, fiery conversations is part of it. Anyway, I appreciate you, Adam. It's been an absolute pleasure to hang out, pal.
Likewise, and hopefully I'll be able to get back this summer and we'll be able to hang out.
Yeah, hang out again. That would be nice.
We shall see. But always a pleasure. Hello to the family, and it's plutoschool.com that people can find your work if they want to learn with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. All right, Mark, have a beautiful night, and we shall talk soon.
Take care, Adam. Thank you, man.
Ciao.
Bye.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed that conversation, that you learned something new and old, that you laughed at least once, and you got inspired in some sort of a way to learn more about the planetary nodes or to take your astrology to a new level. So up here, of course, it's springtime, and I'm quite enjoying that in the north. Yet, according to Rudyard and that idea that Mark talked about, humanity is experiencing this autumn season. Now, as poetic as that is, I actually disagree with that a little bit, and it's from my understanding of the Yuga cycle and the Great Year. It seems that we're actually coming out of winter and ascending in the Great Cycle, the precessions, and that would be more, I suppose, early spring, late winter, early spring. And so I'm actually going to give a call out to all of you listeners for anyone that you know or think of that's a Yuga cycle expert or the Great Year, and would like to hear them on the podcast, because I had an idea for someone that fell through, and I really want to have a great conversation with someone who knows a lot about the precessional cycle and the ages and whatnot. And so if you know anyone, please feel free to reach out or reach out to them and hook them up with me, and we can make that happen. And so again, Mark's site is plutoschool.com. I think this is his 6th visit on the show, and so if you enjoy the vibe Mark and I have, you can just listen to all the other ones. They're all there on the podcast feed that you're probably listening to this on, and if you're on an Android, it's a little bit more challenging to give stars in a review, but it can be done. And so if you do leave some love on the podcast, make sure you leave or take a screenshot and send it to me, and then I'll hook you up with a class. And also, if you want to take your learning to another level, if you want to be a part of a blossoming community of astrologers all over the world, just go visit patreon.com/AdamSummer. And there's monthly classes, 2 parlors a month. It's just an amazing way to immerse yourself in this little world that we're creating over there. And yeah, so this podcast was brought to you by Solar Fire, an amazing astrology program that can help you study the planetary nodes. It's a function that is in the program that you can put into there, and there's a lot of ways that you can utilize the skills of that program to know more. And so just go to alabe.com, use promo code SOMA, and you'll get 15% off of Solar Fire. That's alabe.com, promo code SOMA. And then this podcast is also brought to you by 4sigmatic.com. How do mushrooms relate to the planetary nodes? Well, I think I could safely say that they've been around since we've known about the planetary nodes, just doing their thing silently beneath our feet all along. And so they've been around, oh yes, keeping symbiosis in this world healthy. And it's very important during these times to keep our body healthy and our minds healthy, of course, so that we can be a clean vessel for spirit. And no better way of doing that than to get good quality mushrooms into you. And so go to 4sigmatic.com, peruse their selection, and use promo code SOMA, and you will get 10% off any of the mushrooms of your choice. And then there's my website, holstoheavens.com, where you can visit and sign up for readings and also any of the classes that I have taught throughout the years as well. I'm going to leave you with a short yet very powerful song by the Rising Appalachia Sisters, and it's called Are You Ready? That might not be the exact title, but that's the message of this tune by the lovely sisters from Appalachia. And thank you for making it this far. Thank you, Mark, again for coming on. It's always a deep pleasure to speak with you, and I will share with you all next with Edward Tick, I do believe. We're going to talk more about Asclepian work and also trauma. Until then, be well, be kind, and see you soon.
Sisters, please get ready. Brothers, sisters, please get ready. Brothers, sisters, please get ready. For the time is drawing near. Where